Aloha.
Aloha.
No. I want to hear more aloha. Aloha.
Aloha.
That's what I'm talking about. On a day like today, and speaking now as the family representative, I'm going to forewarn you, I'm going to be a little bit more, shall we say, informal, but no less grateful. Because I want to start by saying thank you to the commander and crew of this great vessel. The aloha that you folks have shown us during this process is memorable and humbling. Thank you all for your service. To everyone involved in the days that brought about this commissioning, and since I'm working without notes here, I don't want to try and list them because I know that I'm going to forget something. I say to all of you, and you know who you are, a deep, deep, heartfelt mahalo. And to everyone here who is assembled, both folks who we know personally, folks we may have not met, in other words, friends we have not met yet, thank you for coming out and thank you for tuning in. I want to extend a special thank you to the folks who gave remarks earlier. Mr. Kenyon, for speaking about the vessel behind us, Mayor Blangiardi, Governor Ige, and Congressman Kahele, for all giving us a different aspect about my father as well as about this vessel. Given that, the words of my father to me before almost any time that I would go before either a crowd or before a small handful of people, he always would say to me, if it's really important to you, remember, always talk story. Now, for those of you here from Hawaii, you know what I'm talking about when I say talk story. Talk story is our exercise of sharing stories amongst ourselves. But my father always taught me that every time you go talk story, you got 3 goals. 1, to find out what people think, what their opinions are. 2, to find out why they feel that way. But 3, and that's the most important one, if you can, figure out how they process those thoughts, what their hopes and fears are, what their aspirations and dreams are, what motivates them, what makes them do the things they do. And he would then follow up by saying, the reason you do all those things is to, if at all possible, help them to become a friend or an ally to you, or at the very least, to try to keep them from being an adversary or an enemy. You see, my father was all about trying to build bridges, trying to find the commonality between people. You know, Governor Ige was talking about my father's friendship with Senator Dole. And that was a friendship, as he mentioned, that was born from the war. Out of the ashes and out of the chaos of World War II, that's where this friendship came from. And it was a deep friendship. They didn't always agree on everything. Hell, they probably disagreed on most things. My father was a Democrat, he was Republican, but they always tried to find that commonality, to try to figure out where they could work together. Because both of them understood, after having seen, and in both of their cases suffered, the horrors of war, they both understood that war is the destructive force. You have to be the creative force afterwards. And in order to be creative, you have to work together. See, my father always said to me when he was in quiet times with me, no man is an island. No good thing comes from just one person. It comes from many voices in the room. Many voices in the room frequently arguing, frequently at odds with each other, but all at the same time eventually understanding they need to come to terms with one another and they need to come to a solution. Because, let's face it, this world doesn't run on just rhetoric. It doesn't run on remarks. It runs on results. And they understood that. I also want to thank Congressman Kahele for talking about our family's history. You know, my father would often say that his story is an unlikely one. He came from the rather, shall we say, challenged background that Congressman Kahele brought up. I mean, let's think about it. His grandparents, who came to Hawaii to work as field workers at the McBride sugar plantation, they didn't know any English. They didn't know a word of English. They sent their son, my father's father, my grandfather, to school in hopes that he would get an education and be able to make something of himself. My grandfather had, by his own estimation to me in conversations with him, something approximating an 8th grade education. But my father and I both agreed Grandpa was one of the wisest men we had ever known, because he understood life, he understood people, and he understood what it took to make things happen and why you have to persist through tough times. All these people helped shape my father. So this brings me to this ship. This ship is kind of an unlikely thing to happen if you really think about it. Because imagine a guy with that kind of challenged background, whose parents weren't even allowed to become naturalized citizens because of the anti-immigration laws of the time. A man who, after Pearl Harbor, the very ground upon which we are sitting now, after Pearl Harbor was bombed, he and other Japanese Americans were not allowed to enlist because they were classified as 4C. That 4C classification, as a lot of you folks in the audience know, means that they were considered enemy aliens, unfit to serve in the military. But after President Roosevelt made the decision to allow Japanese Americans to volunteer, he and thousands of others volunteered for that service and to go into harm's way because they believed in America when America did not believe in them, and for that they were willing to fight in order to fight. They then became the most decorated unit of its size in the military. Now, let's think about this for a while. A guy who is considered 4C is having a ship named after him, you know? And a lot of people will then bring up, well, he got the Medal of Honor. He received that. And this is part of his military legacy. But I got to tell you, I remember when he received that. It was a very personal moment for him. I remember in quiet moments, he would start talking about the guys who didn't make it back. He would talk about the other people he knew who he thought deserved it just as much as he did. And he took it as quite a big responsibility, actually. You know, while it was an honor, he took it much more as a responsibility to try and carry on in the character that that medal would call for. And I bring this up because in these discussions, he would often talk about this country is a unique country. It's unique because of these words, we the people, in order to form a more perfect union, and then he would stop. He would say, mark those 3 words, more perfect union. Those are very specifically there because the Founding Fathers understood that if this American experiment was to last, it would last for a long enough time that the Union would start to recognize that what seemed right at one time actually later on turns out to be a mistake. What seemed just at one time, years and years later, turns out to be the wrong thing to have done. And he always believed in that, and that's one of the reasons why he went to Washington after he got out of the service, after the war, because he wanted to make a difference. When he got into office, it was during the time of the civil rights struggles, rather. And at that point, when he first got into the House of Representatives, there was some question over what rooms he could go into at the Capitol, because there were certain rooms that were traditionally for whites only. So, of course, that changed, because in his mind, America is a more perfect union, because it represents that perfection is a moving target. You're never going to get it, but you're always going to pursue it. He would also talk about a more perfect union, because when he would talk about what he did in the war, he would say, our opponent, what we were fighting for and what we were fighting against, it was just so clear. The enemy that we were fighting was an enemy that thought that there was perfection, perfection in human beings, perfection in certain kinds of human beings, and that perfectionism would be embodied within a single human being. Meanwhile, America is premised upon this more perfect union, always striving for that perfection, but never reaching it, because they know it's impossible. They know it's a moving target, and they know that what seems right at one point may not seem just many years later. So, with that in mind, my friends, thank you for indulging me in this talk story and allowing me to share a little bit of my father and his mindset and what made him think of what he thought and do what he did. I hope you're able to get that. And I also hope that in the spirit of aloha and spirit of ohana, you all consider yourselves part of our ohana. Because by being here and recognizing him on this wonderfully sunny day, you are one of us today. And for that, I am deeply grateful. Mahalo, and God bless.